My name is Cindy, and at 31 years old, I was walking quietly down the long hallway toward the guest room when a faint murmur stopped me in my tracks. The study door, always kept closed after dinner, was left slightly ajar. From within, my father's voice cut through the crack, low and deliberate, the way it used to when he spoke of business deals and men he respected. Only this time the words struck like cold water. "Your sister," he said, his tone edged with disdain. "She isn't worth a penny. She's finished." For a heartbeat, I thought I had misheard. Maybe it was the creak of the old house distorting his words. But then came Nathan's voice, soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. "Dad, maybe that's a little harsh." He was interrupted by the rustle of papers, the scrape of a chair leg against hardwood. I froze where I stood, my breath caught between disbelief and dread. From my angle, I could see just enough. My mother, Sylvia, standing by the window with her arms folded. My father, Richard, leaning over his desk, spectacles glinting in the lamplight. Nathan slouched uncomfortably on the sofa. It might have been any ordinary family conversation, except for the acid in my father's words and the quiet satisfaction on my mother's face. And then she turned. Sylvia's eyes met mine through the narrow opening, cool and deliberate. She didn't startle. She didn't look ashamed. Instead, she gave me the smallest knowing smile, as if she'd been waiting for me to hear every word. That faint curve of her lips hollowed me out more than my father's judgment ever could. It wasn't just cruelty, it was confirmation, a signal that my place in this family had been reclassified while I was still in the room. I stepped back soundlessly, the shadows swallowing me whole. Every childhood memory, each overlooked achievement, every redirected praise, collided inside my chest like 1,000 falling shards. The house felt colder despite the soft glow of the fire flickering downstairs. The portraits lining the hall seemed to stare through me, reminders of the faces that had always taken precedence. By the time I reached the guest room, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely close the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at the bland floral comforter, listening to the muffled laughter rising from the dining room below. It was absurd, that laughter. It didn't belong to the same night I'd just lived through. But betrayal rarely comes with silence. It comes dressed in the familiar sounds of normalcy. I knew I wouldn't sleep. Something inside me had cracked, and the sound of it was still echoing. If you've ever felt the sting of being betrayed by the very people who were supposed to be your greatest allies. "Tell me where you're watching from." Sleep refused to come. Instead, my mind began its cruel arithmetic, tallying every small slight and deferred acknowledgement until it formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I saw it all with new clarity. Nathan had always been the one under the spotlight, the favored son bathed in applause. When he made it to the debate finals his junior year, my parents didn't hesitate to fly across the country to watch him compete. That same week, I had qualified for the state math championship. I went alone, with my teacher as my chaperone. My parents had sent me off with a distracted smile and a line that had followed me all my life. "You'll be fine, Cindy. You always are." It was never meant as comfort. It was a dismissal wrapped in praise, a gentle way of saying I didn't require care, attention, or celebration. Independence had been assigned to me like a chore. There had been only one person who saw me clearly, my grandmother Helen. Her little craftsman bungalow always smelled faintly of lavender and paper. On weekends, she'd spread her bank ledgers across the kitchen table and teach me how to read numbers like stories. She taught me about compound interest, emergency funds, and freedom, the kind of freedom that comes when no one controls your choices. Financial independence, she'd say, isn't just about money. It's about never needing permission. Nathan used to skip those visits, calling them boring. I stayed, soaking up every word. When she passed during my senior year, her absence left a hollow space in my chest, but her will left me $15,000. For Cindy's education, she had written in her neat, looping hand. I still remember the look my parents exchanged when the lawyer read those words, tight smiles, brittle silence. Later, my mother had said with forced sweetness, "Your grandmother always did have a soft spot for you." But I heard the accusation beneath it. What should have been a blessing became a wedge. That inheritance became my lifeline. It got me to college, to freedom, to the version of myself that could breathe. Nathan got full tuition, an apartment, and a car, all courtesy of my parents. I got Helen's gift, and the quiet understanding that I would make it stretch or fail trying. Lying awake in the guest room now, I finally understood what Helen had really given me. Not just money, but tools, armor, the ability to build something that wasn't dependent on anyone's approval. Because tonight, that inheritance, the foundation of my independence, was all that stood between me and the complete erasure of who I was. My parents hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, they had reclassified me as unnecessary. Northwestern was where I learned how to disappear and thrive simultaneously. There, the Albright name meant nothing. It was liberating. No one expected me to be the quiet sister or the dutiful daughter. I could exist as a sum of my own work, my own numbers, my own worth. Helen's money covered the first year. The rest came from scholarships, tutoring jobs, and work-study hours spent shelving books in the library. Every dollar was accounted for, earned, stretched, and repurposed. I was frugal not because I had to be, but because I wanted to be, because control felt like power. Meanwhile, Nathan had chosen USC. My parents justified every extravagant expense. He needs the right environment to succeed. His environment was a condo near the beach and a brand new car in the driveway. Mine was a drafty dorm and used textbooks, and still, I was the one who called home every Sunday. After college, I moved to Chicago and built a life of my own, small but steady. My apartment in Lincoln Park was barely 700 square feet, but each piece of furniture was something I had chosen, earned, and refinished myself. My savings grew, my investments multiplied, and for once, I felt untethered. And yet, I never truly cut the cord. Every month I wired $500 home to Portland. It started during what my father had called a temporary slowdown in his construction business. I sent the first transfer willingly, feeling proud to contribute. Then another. Then another. The slowdown ended, but the payments never did. I convinced myself it was love, a thread connecting me to family. But now, sitting in that guest room, their voices still echoing in my head, I saw it for what it was, a lifetime subscription to their illusion of control. That money, the same money I'd sent faithfully, month after month, had been fueling a machine that now declared me worthless. Thanksgiving dinner had been meant as a celebration. But in my family, celebrations always came with a performance. The table glittered with polished silver and crystal glasses. My mother presided like a director on opening night. I had rehearsed my lines, how I'd tell them Michael had proposed, how his ring was simple, perfect, and chosen with care. But before I could finish the sentence, Nathan interrupted, launching into a monologue about his new startup. My father leaned in instantly, eyes alight, discussing growth strategies and venture capital, while my mother rested her hand on Nathan's as if he were the prodigy of the century. When I tried again to share my news, the room swallowed my voice. Sylvia met my eyes across the table and smiled that same knowing, dismissive smile, the one that said, "You're heard, but you don't matter." By the time the dishes were cleared, my engagement had been erased from the record. Later that night, the house had gone quiet except for the low hum of the furnace. Passing the study again, I noticed the door cracked open. The voices inside were unmistakable. The business, the house, the trust, all of it goes to Nathan, my father said, his tone absolute. It's already arranged. Cindy doesn't need any of it. The words struck harder than before. Through the sliver of light, I saw Nathan nod, uneasy but silent. My mother turned from the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Her gaze met mine once more. No surprise, no guilt, just that same chilling smile. I slipped back down the hallway, her smile burning into me like a brand. And for the first time, I knew that before the night ended, I would uncover every hidden ledger they thought I'd never find. The house was still, except for the dim bedside lamp as I sat on the edge of the guest bed, laptop balanced on my knees. I should have been sleeping, but my mind was a storm. Each keystroke felt like peeling back years of denial. At first, I told myself I was just reviewing my files to calm down, bank statements, transfers, investments. But as the numbers unfolded, they began to tell a story clearer than any conversation. There it was, $500 wired every month for nearly 7 years. $42,000 sent in total to a family account labeled home expenses. But then, deeper down, another transaction froze me in place. $8,000. Gone. Withdrawn from the inheritance Helen had left me. The record described it as a family investment. I traced the line item and found the truth. It had gone to fund Nathan's startup, the same one that collapsed before the ink dried on his business cards. No one had asked. No one had repaid. And then came the worst discovery. Loan documents tied to my father's construction firm, contracts naming me as guarantor. My credit, my reputation, my financial stability, used without my consent. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It was mathematical, quantified, signed. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just the forgotten child. I was the collateral. I remembered signing a stack of insurance forms one Christmas visit, not realizing what had been slipped inside. The realization chilled me more than the November air seeping through the window. I began typing page after page. I cataloged not just the money but the moments. The championship I attended alone. The scholarships I fought for. The dinners where Nathan's sketches or ideas eclipsed my every accomplishment. 7 pages in total. A record of a lifetime's imbalance. It wasn't for them. It was for me. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. Evidence that could withstand the denials I knew were coming. By the time the first light pressed against the blinds, my hands ached from typing. But my mind was clear. I had tallied the ledger, and the balance was final. The only task left was to place it before them. By the time dawn lifted over the hills, I had already brewed a full pot of coffee. The ritual studied me, measured scoops, the hum of the machine, the sharp scent filling the quiet kitchen. I set 4 mugs on the dining table, one for each of us, and laid the folders beside them like place cards at a banquet no one had wanted. Richard was the first to appear, drawn by the smell. His eyes flicked from the mugs to my face, then to the neat stack of papers. He knew it was an ordinary breakfast. Without waiting for him to speak, I gestured to his seat. Sit down. There are things we need to discuss. Sylvia entered moments later, still immaculate in her morning clothes, a faint trace of perfume trailing her. Nathan stumbled in last, hair must rubbing sleep from his eyes. They took their places, puzzled but wary. I slid a folder toward each of them. Inside is a complete record of every dollar I've contributed to this family since leaving for Chicago. $42,000 in transfers, $8,000 stolen from the inheritance Grandma Helen left me, and fraudulent loan documents signed in my name. Read them. Richard flipped a page, his jaw tightening. This is unnecessary, he said. Business is complicated. Families help one another. Help doesn't involve forgery, I answered. My voice was steady, calm, the tone I used in boardrooms. Sylvia reached for her mug, fingers trembling slightly. Cindy, darling, you're overreacting. We've always supported you in our way. Think of everything we've done. Your education, your opportunities. My education was paid for with scholarships and jobs. My opportunities. I carved myself. What you've done is siphoned my resources while telling me I didn't matter. Nathan sat silent, staring at the papers, lips parted but no words coming. I let the weight of the evidence press into the silence. Finally, it pushed my chair back and stood. I'm done. No more transfers. No more guarantees. I will not underwrite this family while being erased from it. The room seemed to contract, the polished table suddenly too small to contain us. Richard's eyes narrowed. Sylvia's face paled. Nathan's fingers tightened around the folder. I left the words there, final, already preparing for what would come next. Nathan was the first to break the silence, his voice rough with disbelief. Cindy, you've misunderstood. Dad never meant you weren't included. These things are complicated. You're making it sound worse than it is. I met his eyes across the table. Did I misunderstand working nights at the library while you were given a car at 16? Did I misunderstand paying my own way through Northwestern while Mom and Dad covered every dollar of your tuition at USC? Did I misunderstand sending $500 a month from my salary while you lived rent-free in an apartment they furnished for you? Color drained from his face. His mouth opened, then closed again. No words arriving quickly enough to blunt the truth. I leaned forward. The aplomb you bragged about. The one that failed within months. Do you know where part of the funding came from? His brows knit, uncertainty flickering. Dad said $8,000? I cut in. From Grandma Helen's inheritance. Money left to me for education. It went into your project without my knowledge and without a single word of repayment. The paper in his hands trembled as he scanned the lines of my documentation. For the first time, he looked less like the favored son, and more like someone who had been kept in a carefully curated illusion. He turned to our parents, his voice rising. "Is this true? You took her money to cover my business. You've been using her transfers all these years." Sylvia started to answer, smoothing her tone into reason. But Richard's sharp glances silenced her. The look only confirmed what Nathan already suspected. His shoulders sagged, confusion giving way to something closer to shame. For the first time, I saw the strings that had kept him elevated, and I watched him realize they had been pulled by the same hands that had tied me down. The room felt different then, as if the script had slipped from their control, and Nathan was left staring at the pages, unsure whether to keep reading or to finally set them aside. After the confrontation, the house seemed to close in on me, every polished surface reflecting back a version of myself I no longer recognized. I returned to the guest room and began to pack. The movements were efficient, practiced, like preparing for a business trip, though this time I knew I would not be coming back. On my laptop, I canceled every authorization connected to the family accounts. The automatic transfers stopped with a few clicks, and I sent notices to my bank that no future payments should be processed. Next came the harder work, placing freezes on my credit reports, locking down the identity my father had used so freely. My firm's legal department responded within the hour to my encrypted message, confirming they would pursue the fraudulent guarantees tied to my name. With each step, the ties loosened until all that remained were the shadows of them. My suitcase stood ready by the door before dawn. I had already changed my flight to Boston, where a new senior role waited. It was more than a promotion. It was a chance to start over in a city where no one knew me, as Richard and Sylvia's daughter, where my work would stand without comparison. Before I left, I reached into my bag for the one item I had carried quietly all these years, the brass key to Helen's Craftsman house. It no longer opened any lock, but it had always reminded me of safety. I stopped at a small shop near the airport and asked them to engrave a single word across its worn surface: boundaries. When I boarded the plane, the key rested in my palm, warm from my grip, a final inheritance not of money, but of meaning. As the wheels lifted from Portland's runway, I understood that my life was no longer collateral for anyone else's debts. Months passed before the first message arrived. Sylvia's email dripped with sentiment, weaving childhood memories into pleas for understanding. She reminded me of holidays past, of meals prepared and sacrifices supposedly made, though each line carried the unmistakable weight of guilt. I read it twice, then answered with 3 sentences. Acknowledgement of receipt, clarification that I was well, and a reminder that future correspondence should be limited to matters requiring documentation. Richard reached out soon after, though his tone was strictly professional. He introduced me as a trusted consultant in letters to his business partners, as though attaching my name might salvage the credibility he had lost. I redirected each inquiry to my firm's general line, ensuring he received nothing more than the same automated courtesy extended to any other client. The distance was firm, and I held it. Nathan's call came later, hesitant at first. He didn't dress his words in excuses. Instead, he admitted what I had long suspected, that he had leaned on their support without asking where it came from, that he had accepted the advantages as natural. "I thought I needed them," he said quietly. "But I think I just didn't know how to stand without the scaffolding." His voice carried no demand, only recognition. For the first time, I believed he might learn to carry his own weight. In Boston, I built something Helen would have recognized. I established a scholarship in her name, dedicated to teaching young women. In Oregon, the very lessons she once laid across her kitchen table, applications filled my inbox, students eager to understand budgeting, credit, independence. Each story reminded me that her legacy had never been the money, but the knowledge she gave freely. The past still pressed against me at times, but it no longer dictated my balance sheet. I was investing in futures that saw worth where mine once had been denied, and preparing for the day I would finally hang Helen's key on my own wall. My apartment in Boston overlooked the Charles River, the water shifting gold under the late afternoon sun. On the wall above my desk hung a simple frame, and inside it the brass key Helen once pressed into my palm. The engraving glinted faintly in the light boundaries. It had become more than a relic. It was a compass, a reminder that the lock's echoes mattered more than the doors closed to me. When Michael and I married, the ceremony was small, held in a hall lined with windows that opened onto the harbor. Friends stood with us, colleagues who knew me not as someone's daughter, but as someone whose work mattered. Nathan came alone, his suit ill-fitting, his expression subdued. Hefford a quiet congratulations and no defense of the people who stayed away. That silence was its own kind of reckoning. The absence of Richard and Sylvia did not hollow the day. Instead, it confirmed what I had come to understand. Family is not defined by bloodlines or shared tables, but by those who invest in your worth without demanding repayment. My grandmother had known that truth long before I did. She planted it in me, and I carried it here to this city, to this life I built without their scaffolding. In the evenings, I sometimes sit beneath the frame and let my eyes rest on the key. It no longer opens Helen's craftsman house, but it unlocks something far greater. It speaks of freedom earned, of dignity reclaimed, of love chosen rather than owed. And as I look out over the river, I know that the future waiting beyond my door is one I will open on my own terms.